Hello fellow sim racers, today I'm taking a look at the clumsily named Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1, or to put it in slightly more human terms, Fanatec's direct drive wheelbase that's designed to work both on the PC and the PS4. There's a lot to cover in this video, so let's just get straight to it. First up, I just wanted to address a question that's been cropping up a lot since I bought the wheel last month, which is why did I decide to move away from the open sim wheel direct drive setup that I've been using? And the answer is, I haven't. For the time being at least, I'll be using both, and I'll explain why in detail throughout the video. I've been wanting to compare Fanatec's offering against more established direct drive wheel setups for quite a long time, and for a variety of extremely boring reasons, it's taken a long time to get it sorted out. And on that note, I should probably mention that I've purchased this wheel from Fanatec and this isn't a review sample. This is definitely going to be quite a long video, so I've included timestamps in the pinned comment so you can skip the bits that don't interest you, like this bit for example. If you're unfamiliar with the Podium Racing Wheel, here's a quick explanation. The Podium Racing Wheel F1 is Fanatec's first direct drive wheel designed to work on the PlayStation platform. It's essentially Fanatec's regular DD1 PC wheelbase with the addition of, I presume, software that's designed to work properly with Sony's current gen consoles alongside the PC as well. And again, I presume it will likely be forward compatible with the next generation console as well, though of course Fanatec won't be able to confirm that yet. You also get a variation of Fanatec's Formula 1 wheel rim featuring the slightly niche blue finish. What that all means is that, in terms of features, this is a 20 Nm direct drive wheelbase, which can deliver incredibly strong and precise force feedback, as well as a feature-rich wheel rim that includes dual paddle clutches, magnetic shifters, and enough buttons and encoders to make a synth player think, oh, that might be a bit excessive. Oh, and before we go any further, I should probably mention that the price is €1,799.95 at present, which, let's face it, isn't cheap. And if you're not familiar with direct drive systems, you may be wondering what's so special about them, why should you care, and that's really quite reasonable, so here's a quick primer on the subject. Again, you can use the timestamps in the top comment if you want to skip this section. Most mass market sim racing wheels, like those made by Thrustmaster and Logitech, use a small motor to generate the force feedback forces you feel as you drive. The rotational movements of the motor are transmitted into the steering column via a gear train or a belt. However, direct drive wheels employ a very large motor, often designed for industrial applications, and your steering wheel is attached directly to the output shaft of the motor, hence the term direct drive. The main advantages offered by such a system are significantly increased torque, higher rotational speeds, and a much simplified design offering improved mechanical reliability. What this means from a driving perspective is that the potential for much higher steering forces, if you desire them, snappier, more detailed force feedback, and faster rotation of the wheel. For me, the latter is one of the biggest selling points, and it makes driving the car on the limit a lot more intuitive, as you can quickly react to very slight changes in the slip angle of the car with much greater precision. If you're going to spend a metric boatload of your preferred currency on a toy wheel to drive fake racing cars, you had better expect that it's extremely well made. And that's where the good news starts with the Podium wheelbase. The build quality is really very impressive, with most of the unit being constructed from metal and carbon, with minimal use of plastics, and only where it's truly needed. On top of that, all of the fixings and fastenings are very high quality, which may not sound like a big deal, but it shows a commitment to doing it right, rather than cutting corners or cutting costs. Everything is dead solid, without a hint of movement or wobble, which is extremely important for a wheelbase designed to produce these types of steering loads. As far as I can tell, the DD1 PS4 wheelbase is mechanically identical to the PC-only version, save for the subtle blue fleck in the carbon fibre side panels, so everything that you've heard about the PC-only version should apply here. May I suggest watching Barry, Sim Racing Garage Roland's excellent test and teardown video if you want slavish attention to detail on the particulars. Now, I made light of the blue wheel earlier, but I do think the blue fleck in the carbon fibre looks stunning. My retail unit is beautifully finished, as were the others that I've seen out in the wild, and where my experience differs somewhat from Barry's review is regarding the quick release. In his video, he demonstrates that there is some amount of slack in the quick release mechanism, allowing the wheel to rock from side to side. As you can see, this just isn't the case on either of my Fanatec rims. Perhaps Fanatec have addressed the issue since the time of Barry's video. Whatever the case, I've not been able to replicate the issue with my setup. The locking clutch ring on the mechanism really does work very well, and the extra couple of seconds it adds to the process will be of no issue for anyone in practice. One of the big benefits of this wheelbase setup for me was the interconnectivity with Fanatec's ecosystem. In the past, I've had all of my devices on separate USB connections, which can cause issues with some titles, especially older ones. So being able to plug my pedals and shifter straight into the wheelbase with the RJ12 cables is a huge plus, and obviously a must-have if you're going to be using this with a console. Speaking of which, if you're using the Club Sport V3 pedals like I am, then Fanatec include a replacement cable for your pedals, which they insist you must use. And on the subject of mysterious connectors that you need to use with little explanation offered at all, you also need to plug in the Fanatec torque key if you want to unlock the full 20 Newton meters of power. Presumably this hardware dongle is intended for those that will be using the wheelbase in a commercial application, allowing them to temporarily limit the turning force of the wheel for the safety of their customers. But since you're an adult, technically speaking, you can just plug it in and forget about it. Before we move on and talk about the wheel rim and the driving experience, there's one final point I'd like to make. One thing I've noticed after using this wheelbase for the better part of a month now is just how much cleaner looking the setup is than other direct drive systems. Not only that, it's considerably more compact as well. Most DD systems use some kind of industrial servo motor which aren't really designed with aesthetics in mind. They often complement this with a bulky external control box and power supply, and some hefty cabling to boot. By moving the control electronics into the unit itself, it does cut out much of this, though the placement of these near a hot motor could possibly be a cause for concern compared to other setups that have these mounted in a separate control box. There is a good sized fan in the unit however, and from my testing at least, the casing of the DD1 wheelbase runs significantly cooler than my old passively cooled OSW setup, so I'm not really worried. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Why the hell is it blue? This is the most expensive product that Fanatec makes. It's adorned with the F1 logo, which I imagine isn't cheap, yet they've gone full Smurf mode with it. Just like literally no F1 wheel rim ever. Actually, I think that's a lie. Williams had blue Alcantara wrapped wheel grips back in their BMW days, but they looked nothing like this, owing to the fact that that was 2 decades ago. Anyhow, now I've got that off my chest, colour schemes aside, it really does actually look the part. Actually, no, the yellow doesn't work either, does it? Sorry. You know what? While the colour scheme may not quite be to the taste of those of us with, well, taste, you can't fault the quality of the finishing. The Alcantara wrap job is absolutely perfect, one of, if not the best I've seen in fact, and the hand grips are super comfortable in my hands. Fanatec really have nailed the ergonomics of this from my perspective. The build and finish of the wheel rim itself is also excellent, with a really nice powder coated chassis and carbon fibre front plate. Back to ergonomics again for a moment, and the buttons are very good. Not the very best I've seen, but still decent. They offer a good throw with very audible and tactile click at the point of actuation. The multi-position switches are very much the same and have a very positive action. There's absolutely no way you're going to accidentally move one of these. Moving on, the Fanatec Funky Switch, yeah, they really call it that, is a D-pad, rotary encoder and push button rolled into one, and it's a godsend for navigating things like pit menus and the iRacing black box. If that's not good enough for you, there's also a 2-axis joystick which you can set up as a mouse in your software. Personally, I've never found a great use for this, so if you have, let me know in the comments. With respect to the front mounted buttons at least, there are some negatives. The thumb wheel rotary encoders are a real weak point. They really don't require much force to move, and there's not a lot of clearance in the thumb holes. This makes it very easy to accidentally move the encoder when you're applying fast wheel movements like opposite lock, and it becomes much more of a problem if you're wearing gloves, which of course you should be because the wheel's covered in Alcantara, which will get badly ruined by your disgusting hand juices. Lastly, for the buttons at least, the toggle switches are really loose feeling and don't give off the same feel of quality as the rest of the wheel. They're workable, they do the job, but they just don't give you that "I spent nearly €2,000 on this setup" feeling. Moving away from all things clicky for a moment to mention the LEDs, 15 of them in fact. They're nice and bright and they're RGB, so you can configure them in Fanatec software to be whatever colour you like, as long as that colour is one of Fanatec's presets. Hopefully they'll allow you to pick a bespoke colour in an update to Fanatec in the future. Helpfully, you can reassign various functions to different light sets, for example to show when traction control or ABS are activated, when the pit limit is engaged, etc., and stack these up using different colours for different functions. The little LCD display is very functional, but it lacks a bit of display real estate compared to other Formula wheels, which is a shame really, as this F1 tie-in product is lacking one of the things that are front and centre on most F1 steering wheels, a whacking great screen. Still, I suppose it's probably best that you keep your eyes on the road anyway. But if you can't help but stare, you can configure the screen to be cycled between various modes that you're choosing, displaying things such as your current gear, DRS availability, fuel remaining, and so on. Flipping the wheel over reveals the Fanatec Podium paddle module and quick release. And the paddle module is very good. The neodymium magnetic shifters are really very high quality, up there with most of the top end stuff in my opinion, and definitely comparable to some of the rims I've used that cost more than this entire system does. The configurable analog panels are very decent as well, though the resistance is a bit on the low side for my liking, but your gripping power may vary depending on your pastimes. Anyway, being able to choose between a single or dual stage clutch, or assigning a handbrake to the back of your rim for example, is surprisingly useful, though I must say Formula rims really don't lend themselves to the worlds of drift or rally, at least not for those of us with thumbs. So all in all, very good on the rim front, and aside from a couple of minor grumblings about the switches and those ill thought out thumb wheel encoders, I'd say it's a bit of a win, though I have just remembered it's blue. And there is one final thought before I start talking about the driving experience. At 270mm, the wheel is a bit on the small side for most cars. If you drive F1 a lot, it's very appropriate, but driving most other cars it does feel very wrong, and you may find that your control inputs are a bit severe for larger cars, at least until you adapt to it. Personally, I found the change from my 305mm turn racing R20 that I've been using a lot as a multi-purpose wheel was quite jarring. Your mileage may vary, of course. I'm going to start out this section with a TLDR for the folks that just want to know how it stacks up against the 20Nm Simucube OSW setup that I've been running for the last couple of years. Simply put, it's really very similar, and that's a good thing. Now, for everyone else, here's some detail. Just for clarity, my comments here relate solely to the driving experience on PC racing sims, as I've not yet had a chance to test it out properly on a PS4, though I believe everything here is applicable to both platforms, with the possible exception of my remarks about the Fanatec software, which is Windows 10 only right now. I've driven a lot of different wheels over my time in the hobby, but there's always something a little bit special about coming back to a direct drive wheel after driving other types. The increased fidelity offered by the larger dynamic range and quicker response time just allows the wheel to better transmit the detail that's included in the force feedback. To me, it's like swapping out a set of desktop computer speakers with nice hi-fi speakers. The song playing through it's the same, but you can hear the recording with more clarity. And that's very much the case with the Fanatec DD1 bass. Honestly, I really can't distinguish much of a difference between this and my Simucube OSW setup. And any difference I do feel, I think is probably easily tweaked in the superb Fanatec software, though more about that later. So in short, the force feedback is excellent, and at 20Nm there's plenty of torque available for all but the most extreme cases. There are arguments for why you might like a wheelbase with more torque, and some of them are even logical, faster response times and more peak headroom for example, but for 99.9% of users, 20Nm will be more than enough. And if the data were available to prove as much, I'd put good money on the average user having their force feedback set to less than 50% gain on any 20Nm system. In this case, it's somewhat compounded by the size of the wheel of course, since this is an F1 size rim and you've got less of an effective lever to resist the turning forces of the motor. But even with larger rims, you're not likely to be getting near 20Nm in daily use. Honestly, I think the only people doing this are YouTubers. One minor thing, and I really wouldn't call this a negative, but when there's no force feedback being communicated to the wheel and you turn it, you can feel a lack of smoothness, a sort of notchiness. This is presumably due to the motor windings passing through the magnetic fields of the motor, and if you're used to other direct drive systems, this is a little bit disconcerting at first, since they often feel silky smooth when they're powered down. But you can't feel it when you're driving, so it's a complete non-issue as far as I'm concerned. I mentioned the Fanatec software before, and while I don't really want to go into it in any great detail here, I think I should probably mention some of the highlights. As far as direct drive software goes, this is by far the best I've used. There are all the normal force feedback settings you would expect, and a series of innovative force feedback filters, some of which mirror what's available elsewhere, and some that are unique to Fanatec as far as I'm aware. Whatever the case, in my experience, the control you have over the force feedback signal being output by your sim is second to none. Nice work, Fanatec devs. Of course, tweaking all of this can become a job in and of itself, but the default game profiles aren't half bad in my opinion, and making a few educated quick changes usually gets you in the ballpark pretty quickly in my experience. Another nice touch is the profile system, which makes saving and recalling setups a cakewalk. So much so that developing different force feedback profiles on a per car basis is more than feasible if that sort of thing floats your boat rather than, buoyancy. This one has run on a little bit longer than my usual videos, so well done to everyone that stuck with it, and welcome to the video for everyone that skipped straight to this bit. In the simplest possible terms, Fanatec appear to have made an excellent product in the Podium Racing Wheel F1. The gripes I have with the wheel after about a month's worth of ownership are pretty minor, and they mostly relate to the aesthetics of the wheel rim. The wheelbase itself is well built and performs the task admirably, supplying force feedback that I believe is the equal to my Simucube based OSW system, which is to say excellent. But all of that does come at a cost, and this setup does cost a couple of €100 more than a 20 Nm OSW setup paired with a Fanatec Formula rim. Though that's perhaps an unfair comparison since you'd have to get that converted to USB to work. What you do gain for that extra cost is compatibility. The wheel will work on PC, PS4 and on Xbox One consoles as well, but you'll need to buy an Xbox compatible rim for it to work with the latter. You also gain compatibility with games too, with new releases often having a Fanatec control profile predefined. And thanks to the modularity of the ecosystem, getting everything to play nicely is just a lot simpler. And ultimately, that's what attracted me to this particular wheel in the first place. I'll be following up this video in a few weeks with a side-by-side comparison of the OSW and the Fanatec setup, though as I've mentioned throughout, there's really not a lot in it. I'll also update this once I've had a chance to give it a proper run with the PS4 and GT Sport in particular. And I'm going to finish out the video by answering some of the common questions that I get about direct drive wheels all the time, since I know they're going to crop up in the comments. Does a direct drive wheel make you faster? Well, for me, over one lap, not really. And I demonstrated this in a video comparing lap times using a Logitech G29 and my direct drive setup. But I maintain that it's easier to drive consistently, so I maintain that I'm likely faster over a stint than I was before I moved to direct drive. How much better does the force feedback feel? Honestly, it's actually not massive. If I had to put a number on it, maybe 20% better. But what does feel a lot better is the speed of response though, which allows me to make much quicker reactionary inputs when needed. Is using a direct drive wheel more immersive? Simply put, yeah. The smooth feel, direct forces and very metal on metal build feel so much more professional. Once you add on a real-world wheel rim or a high-end replica, and the immersion factor is significantly higher than the mass market offerings. Is it worth the money? Who knows, we all value things differently, but for me, I use my wheel every single day, and the total cost of my OSW setup has worked out as around £1 per day of use, so for me, it's a no-brainer. Are direct drive wheels complex to set up? All of the systems are different, and Fanatec is probably the easiest, but what you will find is that, on PC at least, there's just a lot more fiddling around with profiles and in-game settings than with a belt or gear-driven wheel. If you're easily frustrated, then this may not be the best thing for you. Do direct drive wheels work with every game? Mostly. But how plug and play things are does vary, particularly on the PC. With modern sims, everything's usually fine right out of the box, but for some slightly older and almost all classic sims, there's usually some level of file editing or tweaking necessary. And even the most plug-and-play direct drive offerings can't get you to avoid this stuff entirely. What kind of rig do I need for a direct drive wheel? Something very solid. I found my old tube frame steel rig was poorly prepared for the torque provided, and it would twist under rotation. If your rig's moving in sympathy with the wheel, then it's damping the forces to some extent. So for me, this is something that a lot of sim racers underrate. And I personally wouldn't consider using a direct drive wheel with a desk clamp, though there are plenty of people out there that do. Again, it's really about what works best for you. Finally, should I buy a direct drive wheel? I don't know, I'm not your dad. Nobody needs a direct drive wheel, but then again, nobody needs a racing sim. Do what makes you happy. So guys, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, it'd be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe so you can see more content like this in the future. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.